With the official 1.0 release of the Digimon TCG slowly coming up on the horizon, I figured it was time that I give you guys an updated meta-analysis for the Digimon TCG Set 1.0 format, given that we now have more data to go off of thanks to the recent Pro Play Games tournaments held over the past couple of weekends. So what do you say we get started and talk about some of the winning decks and popular trends for the Digimon TCG? Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven Rodriguez. I'm your True Champion, and as I said, I'm going to be giving you guys sort of an update to what I think the best decks are, or what the meta is looking like for the 1.0 format in the Digimon TCG. I made a video a while back talking about my top 5 favorite decks in this format, but that was more based on personal opinion and what I personally experienced whenever I did go to tournaments. In this video, we now have 2 very specific tournaments I'm going to be drawing from to kind of show you guys the trends and winning deck lists, and that will be the Pro Play Games 3-box webcam events that happened over the past 2 weekends. Despite the Digimon TCG still being in its infancy, given that people don't have access to all the cards they want to and may not get access to them for a very long time to come, I still feel like that between these 2 events, we were able to kind of get a good idea of what people are building and why the things they're building are winning. So hopefully I can dissect some of the trends we're seeing between these 2 different events, explain why they happen, and give you some good examples on what winning deck lists look like, as well as some options that you might not know exist that have tons of competitive viability. Specifically, in this video, I'm going to do 3 things. The first thing will be kind of like a compare and contrast between the 2 events, so that way I can show off to you guys some of the trends that were going up and some of the trends that were going down between the 2 different weeks, and why the players might have made those decisions. Similarly, the second thing I'm going to do is sort of a breakdown between both top 16s, why the decks that are doing well kind of did well, because it's one thing for a deck to be like well represented within the entire field of the event. It's another thing for that deck to then convert its way into the top 16 and maybe even the top 4, so we can kind of discuss not only what decks are being played, but also what decks are winning as a result of being played. And finally, the last thing we're going to do is show off some really cool deck lists that came about as a result of these events, because there were definitely some interesting things that popped up out of the woodwork between the first 2 events. It was honestly crazy to me how different the second event was in terms of the first one, just based on the diversity of decks, deck techs, and options people were playing within their lists, that I feel like there's a lot to talk about in this last section, and that's where the big meat is going to be in terms of like what people are doing to become more competitive at this game. And I'm honestly super excited to talk about that section. Man, I love making this kind of content. I just find it so interesting, and if you guys find it interesting as well, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. And if you want your very own shot to partake in a really cool competitive Digimon TCG tournament, Pro Play Games is holding another 4-box tournament this weekend, Saturday, January 9th. So be sure to check out the registration page. Hopefully their 128 player cap has not been reached already, but you never know. Definitely check it out if you have not already. And if you are a little unlucky and didn't get your chance to actually partake in the tournament, don't worry, they will be streaming the entire event on their Pro Play Games live channel, where I will actually be commentating the event. So if you want to come stop by, hang out with us while we not only watch an awesome tournament, but talk about this game some more, definitely check them out in the links down below. And while you're at it, follow me on Twitch as well. I go live every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I spend a lot of time in just chatting, and every now and then I do play the Digimon TCG over there as well. So you can come stop by, we can enjoy this game together live and in person, and just have a blast. But with all that being said, I think it's time we analyze the past PPG events and took a look at what the Digimon TCG Set 1.0 format is looking like. Alright guys, let's get started. Alright, first things first, the 109 player online 3-box tournament that was held kind of the weekend of Christmas had a really interesting sort of dynamic between all the decks that were shown. First and foremost, the obvious thing, and the thing you'll be seeing a lot throughout this video, is the representation of Omnimon decks. This will be a very important thing I want you guys to kind of keep track of as we go about this video, but we already know Blue Omni and Red Omni are towering factors in the Digimon TCG metagame, and if you guys have seen my top 5 meta decks of Digimon TCG, you will know why. But what's really interesting here in the first event is that we have an equal split of 32 and 32 between Red and Blue Omni, and the reason why that's interesting is because as a player base, we have all objectively decided that Blue Omni is the best version of Omnimon in terms of consistency and overall ability to deal with the metagame. But an interesting opinion that a lot of people have, including myself, that influenced them to play red Omni instead of blue is the Omnimon mirror match. Because red Omni decks have access to really powerful cards like Gaia Force, as well as the other kind of powerful options in DP gain and security attack gain in red, they can actually become a more aggressive style of Omni deck, which is really good at dealing with blue Omni. So the reality is, if you think blue Omni is the best deck and you still want to play Omnimon, then technically it's smart to play red Omni because you have all the strengths of Omnimon, but also a really good blue Omni matchup. The problem arises, however, in your generic consistency against other decks. Red Omni has a harder time dealing with green, while blue Omni can sometimes deal with it a lot easier. So there's definitely other factors that can contribute to which one you play, and apparently in this tournament, half the players were split on which one they should actually pilot, which I thought was really interesting. It just goes to show that even though we do have a definitive best deck in the format, not everyone will contrive to playing that, for whatever reason that may be. It could be card pool, it could be personal choice, it could be because they think there's actually a better option out there. And that is the main thing that I kind of want to talk about when it comes to looking at this overall player base breakdown. Moving on to the second Pro Play Games event, we see a gigantic increase in the amount of blue Omnimon players. Now this could be because there's more people playing this event, therefore there's more people that think blue Omni is just better, or it's because blue Omni actually won the previous event, the first one, and now people are like, okay, that is the best Omnimon variant, let's go ahead and do that. But I definitely have a very interesting thing that I want to show you guys once we get to the top 16 breakdown, so I'll put a pin in the Omnimon discussion for now because there's something way cooler to talk about, which is the amount of green and purple decks in this event. As you can see from the graph in front of you, we have an increase in the amount of purple and green players to around 20 players each, which is a whopping like 8 or 10 people plus from the previous event. And a big reason for this might have been the performance of one David Sue from the first PPG event. He piloted a really cool blue and purple hybrid deck that focuses on using the main value purple package while throwing in some blue mats from the starter deck and cards like Akai's Breath and Kaiser Nail to abuse the powerful on-play effects that purple has access to, slash just have a nice little extra removal card on top of your trump swords. Out of the 21 people that were piloting purple in this event, over half of them were piloting some version of the blue and purple deck. Some had personal choices for themselves, or some were copying the list verbatim from what David Sue was playing in the last event. And I found this really interesting because, as you guys know, in my top 5 meta decks video, I talked about how purple really wasn't performing as well as I thought it would, given how many people were actually playing it. And it showed in the first event as well. There was only like 10 or 13 people playing purple, even though it is undoubtedly one of the strongest decks in terms of Set 1.0 support. Now that we got that little light compare and contrast out the way for what these tournaments were looking like, let's talk about some of the heavy impacts and implications of this while talking about the top 16. First things first, by no surprise anyone here, the conversion rate for Omni decks doing well is pretty much 1-to-1. We had over half in the breakdowns for both events. We have over half in the top 16 breakdowns for both events as well. One thing that is a bit different though is the number of each specific type of Omni. In the first event, we had 8 blue Omni and 6 red, and the second event, we had 7 blue Omni and 6 red. So while blue Omni went down, red Omnimon did stay the same within the second event. And again, purple and green are showing up 1-to-1 for the first event, and 1 purple and 2 green for the second. So here's where conversion rates are super interesting. You notice how I said 1-to-1 for blue? That basically means that in terms of the overall breakdown of the field, it stayed pretty much the same for the top 16. That makes sense, because this idea of popularity is a heavy factor when it comes to analyzing metagames after the fact. What that means is if a deck is played at higher numbers, there's a higher chance that it'll actually show up in a winning placement like top 8, top 4, or top 16. So it's no surprise that given how many people were playing Omnimon decks, that Omnimon did well as a result of the top 16. The more interesting result here on both of these is the change from the first event and the second event, and how you really didn't see a difference between the amount of green and purple decks doing well, even though the amount of people playing green and purple went up by a lot between the first and second events. Now, there could be several reasons why this might be. It could be because all of the purple decks were different, therefore there's no reason to think that just an increase in all of them actually leads to an increase in the amount doing well. It could be that every single time they played against their like winning in for top 16, they just dead drew all at the same time, moving every single card, and they lost. There's so many things that can mitigate all these different variables, but the fact that it stayed the same is super interesting because in all likelihood it should have gone up given our theory of popularity, but it didn't. And that could be an explanation as to why this deck isn't performing well, because it just isn't better compared to decks like Red and Blue Omni. And I know that might be sad to hear for all the purple and green players of the world out there, but just keep in mind that just because I'm saying that given the way the meta is, purple is not better than blue, doesn't mean that it's, you know, strictly worse and will always lose. It just means that on a whole, in an entire event, it's more likely that a blue deck does well compared to a purple deck. There's always an exception to the rule. These are just the rules that I'm trying to figure out, given the results we've seen throughout events. And the main thing I want you guys to take away from this top 16 breakdown isn't that, oh, despite being played more, purple decks still didn't do that well. It's that, no. Purple is a deck that people are seeing more viability in, and so is green, and the reason for that is because the decks are just great. I was talking about how in my top 5 meta breakdown that the real reason why they weren't being played was because no one had faith in them. The first event for PPG gave people faith in green and purple, so they played more. Just because it didn't pan out this time doesn't mean it won't pan out in the future. Definitely, if you're someone who's wanted to play green or wanted to play purple and you're a little afraid of doing it, don't be. The decks are perfectly great and can handle literally anything in the 1.0 metagame. It's not that diverse, it's not that complicated. Give it a shot, you might just be surprised what happens. And hopefully with this next section, I can show you guys what these winning deck lists are looking like, why they might look this way, and hopefully give you some inspiration on how to build your own in the future. Alright boys and girls, here we are at like the winning deck list section for this meta analysis, and what I'm gonna do specifically is talk about some of the weird card choices that you might not be seeing in every single blue Omni, purple, or green deck, but that you're seeing in these ones, and explain why they might be in here as a result of the current metagame. Because I feel like these were choices that are made given the metagame, and not necessarily choices that were made as a result of like lacking cards. That is a very important distinction, because I know we are in pre-sale times, and some people are just playing whatever they have, and that's all they're doing, and that's why they're playing the things they are. But these 3 decks, I think, are making very specific choices, and hopefully I can explain them and show off to you why they might be different compared to what you're normally used to seeing in cookie cutter versions of these lists. Speaking of cookie cutter, the first thing we're going to talk about is Blue Omni, the most cookie cutter deck in the game. You guys know this deck by now. Some things that are pretty obvious here is just the standardness of pretty much everything until we get to the level 6s. We are seeing some pretty cool techs in the form of Volcanic Digimon and a reduction in the amount of Omnis. Now I will say this reduction of Omnis might be a result of, you know, not having 4, but the inclusion of Volcanic Digimon is definitely a specific meta-driven choice, because Omnimon, specifically Blue Omnimon, is really bad at comebacking in the late game as a result of mid or even early game pressure. So if they're stalling a little bit to get their Omnimon in play, or their first one gets responded to and they're facing down the barrel of like 4+ attacks, it's hard for Omnimon to come back in those situations because the deck is just inherently slow if you don't just draw your big memory cards. So having a big blowout card like Volcanic or Metal Digimon is a popular thing a lot of people are doing. I've been talking about doing it for a long time in this deck, but we're seeing more and more people do it in more unique ways, like Volcanic Digimon, for example, because not only is this card kind of like Metal Digimon in that it can also become Omni given the blue and red Digivolution cost, but it's really good at dealing with one of the main counters to Omnimon, which is Rookie Rush. That deck is literally designed to pretty much beat Omnimon, and now you have a card in your deck that just beats it outright, and it's really good against like some awkward board states your opponent uses against you in a lot of matchups. Like whenever I fight against Omnimon and I have them in a game-winning position, the way I win the game is by playing 2 more rookies down from my hand and just passing, and now I have more dudes on board than they can kill because their removal is so defined by Omnimon, but having a card like Volcanic can heavily counter that and shift the game right back in your favor. And this is a super awesome kind of tech choice that a lot of people are doing in the more successful blue Omnimon decks. The second thing I want to talk about is this inclusion of Ice Wolf Claw or Cocytus Breath as like an extra removal option. I believe this is in here because it's the replacement for the 4th Omni, but in case it's not, I do want to bring up that it's a really nice inclusion in this deck because having just a hard removal spell in blue is super nice. Yes, Cocytus Breath is not the best removal spell out there. There are definitely better ones, but it is better than nothing. And if you ever check it as a result of security, boy oh boy, is that a ton of value for you. So I do like seeing it in this deck. It adds some breath, for lack of a better better word, into it and can give it some nice options that otherwise it wouldn't have. So I like this inclusion. I can see why this deck won. Moving on to the second deck, the purple deck piloted by Levi Love, you will notice a trend here in the amount of tech cards being played. First things first, I want to talk about the Volcanic Dramon. I cannot for the life of me figure out why this is in here other than to crap on the mirror match and crap on Rookie Rush, because purple is also a deck that doesn't love being rushed early because it can take a while to set up some defensive plays like Vilemon or Piedmon or Chimeramon or whatever. It can take some time and it does give your opponent a lot of memory, therefore they can play board really easily. Having a card like Volcanic specifically for the mirror match sounds really dirty, or just for whenever you have your opponent like going greedy and going wide is honestly really valuable, and I like seeing it in this deck as well, and I might consider playing it myself because frankly a card like Volcanic is so easy to play in almost any deck right now that the ability just to drop it against your opponent out of nowhere seems too juicy, and tech cards are really powerful in a deck like purple given the amount of filter you have by your Gabumon or your milling effects, which is just a bonus if you ask me. The other thing that I find really interesting in Levi's deck is this neat little Lilithmon package he's running kind of value purple with Lilithmon just thrown in there. You do see people doing this because the deck is so fluid in terms of its level 6 and level 5 space that you can actually run a couple copies of Lilith and get some really good value out of your option cards. And the really cool thing about like just slapping in Lilith in your deck is that you can actually cut option cards to make room for her, because every single time you include a Lilithmon, you essentially have one more copy of almost every single option card you play. So now he has not one Heat Viper, but 3. Not 3 Grizzly Wing, but 5. Not 3 Trump Sword, but 5. So having that ability to reuse these busted cards is really valuable, and Levi saw that value and was like, you know what, that's more important to me than just overall consistency of Piedmon and Beelzemon and Millenniumon. So I'm going to throw it in here and see what happens, and honestly, I kind of like this inclusion as well. You guys know how much I love Lilithmon. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is green. Now this will be a very simple deck list, but there's one choice in particular that I am seeing more and more people do that I am just amazed to see actually, and happy that I was wrong, and that is the inclusion of a card called Terror's Cluster. I wrote this card off the second I saw it. I'm gonna hold my head up here, folks, and say I was wrong. This card being in the 1.0 format is ridiculous for the viability of green in the Digimon TCG. Because before Terror's Cluster, the amount of removal you had was Big Titamon, Flower Cannon, Go Burr, and that was it. But now you have Terror's Cluster, you have a 1-card answer to a rested Omnimon, which is crazy because if you just have a Lilymon underneath a Titamon, you swing at security, rest the Omni, go Terror's Cluster, that is such a powerful swing turn for you, it's not even funny. And while it may not be like the most memory efficient thing, everything else about green is memory efficient, so you don't need to worry about playing this 1 to even 3 of card in your deck because you're more than consistent enough most of the time to warrant playing it. And honestly, I am so shocked to not see the value of this card immediately upon 1.0 release, and more people are putting it in their decks at 2 or 3 of, and I just love to see it. I think it's a really good sign for the amount of people that want to have green become better as the metagame evolves. So if you are still thinking that green maybe isn't for you, you have some bad experiences with it, whatever, and you haven't played Terror's Cluster in your deck, try throwing in a couple copies and see how the deck performs for you against the big decks like purple, blue, and even red, and you might just be surprised by how good it is. The moral of the story here when it comes to building these decks is that any one change you think is deserved in a deck can actually make it more viable. Don't be afraid to slap in a 7-cost option card or an off-color 11 hard drop into your deck. You might just be surprised how much power you can get out of it, because I'm a firm believer that in the Digimon TCG, deck building is the #1 priority when it comes to becoming more competitive. You need to understand how to build your deck to the point where it can beat pretty much anything in the format. And if you do that, trust me, you will see the results you want to with the deck. And that's what was really cool about this past weekend's event. We saw a drastic change from the first one to the second one in terms of how many risks or just how many deck differences people were playing. We saw more hybrid decks, we saw purple and green rise in popularity because they saw more viable ways to play those decks, and we just overall saw blue Omnimon deck kind of responding in kind, like, oh, if people are playing hard play rush style things against me, I'm gonna try and tech in for kind of stuff like that in case I need to come back. And I saw plenty of matches where blue Omnimon was on its heels and cards like Volcanic or Metal or Kakai's Breath actually swung it back for them in their favor. So not only are the kind of fringe or rogue decks adapting, but so are the top meta decks. This meta is always evolving, and despite being only one set, there is so much innovation to be done when it comes to actually building decks and actually winning with those decks. And there you guys go. That'll go ahead and do it for today's meta analysis of the Pro Play Games webcam events from these past few weekends. Honestly, I love doing these kinds of videos, and hopefully I didn't just confuse you guys to no end and you became better players for watching this video. If you did and you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell with notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. And if you guys have any lingering questions or just want me to discuss anything further, please feel free to follow me over on Twitch. I do go live every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I spend a lot of time in just chatting, and I love talking about this game with you guys, so come stop by, ask some questions live in person. We can have a fun little chat and hopefully just have a good time. Links to my Twitch down below, as always. And with that being said, I've been TrueChampionSteven, and thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, and live well. And I will see you all next time. Peace.